go to school with and are in contact with. And if I don't give my child the vaccine, then what would happen if they got sick and they spread the illness around to their entire school?
I'd just like to say something really quick. So, first of all, Jenny McCarthy's case, isn't that her child was autistic? He didn't die.
Right.
Okay, all right. Yeah, okay, thank you. Just making sure that I wasn't getting that wrong.
I'm sorry if I confused you.
Oh, you said something that made it sound like he was dead, so
No,
it's okay. No, I just wanted to get that out there.
There was another case where the child did die.
Yeah. Okay. It was just a juxtaposition, and I just wanted to clarify. So her campaign is that the 1% of kids who develop autism due to vaccines. And there is this correlation, and there is a lot of research out there, but there have been two turns in the medical world. And one has been, oh my gosh, we're seeing all this research. It looks like it's going in the direction of this is a little part of this vaccine is giving this undesired result. And then again, we've come back full circle to just kidding, it didn't really look like that happened. So I also think that coming from a religious standpoint is not as effective in this case, because I have a lot of people who growing up, like their parents aren't religious at all, and they just abstained from vaccines because they had no idea what the hell the medical research was going on, and they didn't know who to trust. And they were just scared, and they didn't know whether it was the right decision or not. So I think that phrasing this or posing this as a religious question ignores the fact that there are a lot of people who are not giving their children vaccines for totally non-religious reasons. So that's all I have to say about that. Also, I agree. I think that if you're going to not give your child a vaccine, there are consequences and implications that you have to be responsible for. And I'm not sure in what capacity that could be, but.
Brian, please. I just want to make a quick general point. I think there's a big difference between, the government compelling parents to give their children emergency medical procedure and actually prosecuting them or, sending them to jail for, failure or, whatever. I think there's a big difference between the two of that. I think if the government can, if a doctor, sees a child and there's a direct procedure that can save their life and the parent says no, the government should absolutely go in and, say, no, you have to have this. But, prosecuting parents for that, I think, would be a little, I think parents generally, obviously cases of abuse is different, but parents generally have their child's best interests at heart, and so prosecuting parents for that gets into a really complicated area of, parental rights, and I think it's best to stay out of. Ideally, I think the government should, protect children and try not to punish parents. Also, in terms of vaccination, if you want to send your kid to public school or do a lot of other things, you have to get them vaccinated. I think that's absolutely proper. And if you don't want to vaccinate your children, there are homeschooling options. There are other options that you can, pursue, like basically homeschooling without, endangering, other people's lives. So I think that, those laws that force parents to vaccinate their kids if they want to send them to public schools are very proper, very right, and I think that's what you do with that.
I was agreeing with you up until that last point. I think, on the surface, it seems great that, yeah, we're going to vaccinate, we're going to mandate this vaccination so that none of the children who go to school can, infect other students. And yeah, it sounds all nice and rosy, but I think the flaw in that is the lack of liberty that I was mentioning before. And I think that if you do have an outbreak of something that's, vanished from American society, like for example, smallpox, you treat it just like as if you would treat someone who gets sick because of avian flu. And you quarantine them or you keep them home until, it passes, and then you send them to school. It's not like this happened and therefore I have to do this or else I get punished. So, I mean, I think that's my take on it.
I want to just add a little bit, a tiny bit, which is you all give me lots of viruses all the time. And unfortunately, I don't know it until after I have it. So there is this sort of, so quarantine, I wonder, I think it's perfectly fine what you said, except for the last point, whereas quarantine, unfortunately, is after. And by then, everyone's already gone. So, but there was a question in the second room, so go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just point out that the actual biology of it is there's an incubation period, which means that depending on the disease, it could be a very long period of time, sometimes several weeks, sometimes even a month, sometimes more, where you don't even know if the person had the disease, so quarantine would be absolutely useless. I think that, not just I think that this is frankly just a completely obvious point that, no, we should vaccinate them, simply because liberty is all fine and dandy and looks great on paper. I myself am somewhat of a civil libertarian. However, this is the case of public safety. And as nice as it is to think that we're all free, there is actually an objective, empirical problem here. It's people can die from diseases. And vaccines prevent that. And we have something called herd immunity, where if enough people have vaccinations, disease is not likely to spread to some people who, for very specific reasons, have very specific allergies to certain components of vaccine. But we usually know that in advance. Or if the vaccine contains simply attenuated, not completely neutralized viruses, and people have compromised immunity for various reasons, they can't physically get a vaccine. But we already know that in advance. So we rely on herd immunity. If we don't have herd immunity, they are not only possibly, they are very likely to get an infection because oftentimes they have already compromised immune systems. So there's just a moral imperative for us to temporarily just set all the fancy philosophical debates aside and go with the public safety issue.
I want to speak about the vaccines actually. As someone, I don't take vaccines at all ever, and it's not because I'm against vaccines. It's because I don't know enough about them. So right now, that's not true. I'm actually vaccinated against like smallpox and all the bacterial diseases.
All of you have vaccinations. You wouldn't be here.
Right. So there are two classifications. There are two broad classifications of vaccinations. There's vaccines against bacterial diseases, and there's vaccines against viruses. Bacterial diseases those vaccines are incredibly effective. That's how we wiped out smallpox and a lot of the other big diseases that we eradicated in most of the world in the last century. So those vaccines, of course, I have received, and you do get and maybe there are some specifics there, but I don't think that people have a right for religious reasons to expose other people to those diseases by not getting vaccinated. The issue here, I think, is the right of the many over the right of a single individual, and that's really the issue. But for the flu vaccine or for some other vaccines that function differently and don't immunize in the same way, I think the case is a little bit different, and the science is very different, as I'm sure some of you are aware of. So I think that it's sort of an interesting case, where the government has done the research and determined that to be vaccinated against smallpox is a requirement because, it is protecting the rights of the many, but the flu, it's a little bit different, so they give that right to us, and I just don't know enough to make that decision.
I wasn't referring to the flu vaccine.
Right, yeah. No one had mentioned the distinction, so I thought it was worthwhile.
And I agree with your distinction, although...
There's more science to it there than that.
Yeah, I just wanted to... I'm not sure whether you said which one was more effective, because I did want to say that smallpox is included viral.
Oh, okay. Well, perhaps. But, there are those diseases which we've basically eradicated through vaccination.
I'm looking at the clock, so I want to sort of get to some more questions. So in the third row of people.
Okay. Well, I also have something to say about vaccines, but if someone else wants to jump in,
No,
please.
please.
Vaccines. But I think this is a really important subject, and obviously it's creating the most discussion of these things. And I think that just one point that Ibraham made about if someone passes, for example, avian flu to someone else, is that we currently do not have a very effective way to prevent avian flu. We can develop flu vaccines, but as David refers to, they aren't perfect. They have to be changed every year, and you have to predict what they are. But for cases like polio, smallpox, they have been wiped off from this country. Smallpox has been wiped off the face of the earth, and they used to be huge problems. So I think that they are preventable by these vaccines. Like when these vaccines started, this is when the So I think it does depend on the disease and to what effect we can have an effect on it beforehand. I think there was something else I was going to say. Oh wait, yeah, another thing with there's this whole vaccine controversy is obviously I'm too young to remember this, but I know that my parents lived in an age where polio was a very real problem.